At least 18 people have been killed and 30 wounded after police opened fire on protesters demonstrating against the coup in Myanmar. Officers shot stun grenades, tear gas and bullets at crowds across the city of Yangon, the country's deadliest day of demonstrations since the military coup on the 1st of February. Earlier in the day, I caught up with the Foreign Minister Marise Payne and I asked her if it is time now for our government to sever all links, military and otherwise, with Myanmar.
Kieran, we are certainly very, very concerned about the reports overnight of the use of lethal violence against peaceful protesters in Myanmar, and we have been absolutely consistent in our urging of the military regime to both not use lethal violence and to ensure that they are observing the sorts of approach which would not result in these deaths. It is a very, very distressing situation, and the protests that we have seen are clearly, strongly indicative of the views of many, many thousands and thousands of people across the Myanmar community. We have also been very clear that we need to ensure we are advocating strongly on behalf of a detained Australian, Sean Turnell. We continue to do that at the highest levels, both in Myanmar and here in Canberra, to seek the release of Professor Turnell, who has been detained since the 6th of February. I want to acknowledge the opportunity he had to have a conversation with his wife last week and for her to be able to assure herself of his state of health. But nevertheless, we continue to focus absolutely on his release and on the release of others who've been arbitrarily detained through the processes that the military regime have undertaken. It is a circumstance in an ASEAN neighbour that Australia has strongly supported in its transition to democracy over many years now. That is deeply concerning for ASEAN. I've been engaging with my colleagues, including current ASEAN Chair Brunei and Foreign Minister Dato Erdogan there, but also a number of other colleagues across the region and more broadly as to our concerns, and very clearly demonstrating Australia's support for the process of democratisation that had been underway and for the return to order that we seek.
Is the government looking at a Bob Hawke-style amnesty for temporary visa holders from Myanmar?
Kieran, there's a number of aspects of our relationship with Myanmar which are under review. That would, of course, be a matter for the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Immigration in portfolio terms. But importantly, we have said that we are reviewing a number of aspects of our relationship. You raised our military engagement, which has been relatively low-key for some period of time, does not engage the Myanmar military in a way that would contribute to any of the actions that they have been engaged in recently. But that and the aspects of our development assistance that continue, we are looking at those very closely.
Chinese authorities are reportedly advising international students to attend universities in other countries. At the same time, we've seen the US trade deal with China, New Zealand upgrading its FTA with China, the EU signing an investment pact. It looks like our allies, Canada through coal, New Zealand, lobster, are taking our market effectively. I'm wondering, does the government have a clear strategy to try and improve relations with China, or are we just waiting for them to call?
Well, Kieran, we have a very clear strategy about protecting Australia's national interests and in the context of that also protecting our national security. We have made clear our definite willingness to engage with Chinese counterparts and our mature expectation that that would be able to occur. It will be a matter for those officers in the Chinese system as to whether they wish to have those conversations. But importantly, in trade terms, we can be absolutely clear about Australia's position in support of open markets, in support of the usual rules rules of international trade and the World Trade Organisation. Where there have been issues, we have taken them up respectfully and appropriately with Chinese authorities, including in a number of commodities, as you've suggested. Where we've been unable to determine an outcome with those Chinese authorities, such as in the case of barley, we have taken those matters in an official sense to the World Trade Organisation processes. As far as education is concerned, I think we know that that Chinese students have been very strong supporters of their participation in the Australian education system in the past. Indeed, over the last 2 decades, we've seen very significant numbers of Chinese students here. All of our international student involvement has, of course, been affected by the impact of COVID-19 and the inability of people to travel and to move around in the ways in which we were used to. But we are very clear that we want to be able to invite those students back to Australia as soon as it is possible to do so from the many countries that they come from, and that's over 150 countries where we see students coming to Australia. I know, for example, under the India Economic Strategy, education is one of our key pillars and reinforced under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership we have just signed with India in the last 12 months. So that focus of bringing students from all over the world to a quality education in China absolutely continues to be one for the government.
Is there a risk that we see our own backyard through the prism almost exclusively of US-China rivalry, and that our relationships, you know, like the one with Indonesia, for example, are to some extent left to wither?
No. In fact, I absolutely fundamentally disagree with that proposition. Nothing could indeed be further from the truth. The work that we have done in the Pacific and Southeast Asia in response to COVID-19, including our Partnerships for Recovery engagement across those many areas of our region, the work of bringing the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, the IACEPA, to fruition in 2020. That in itself speaks volumes for the priority that we place on our engagement, not just with Indonesia, but across ASEAN. And those ASEAN relationships are seen entirely through our focus on ASEAN centrality, support for the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, a very seminal piece of work, in fact, largely led by Indonesia in recent times. And I want to acknowledge particularly the leadership of Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi in that. So no, I would respectfully disagree with that proposition, because it is one of our very, very strong focuses, and done entirely through a lens that is Australia's lens and Australia's alone.
The Canadian lower house declared the treatment of Uyghur minority in the Xinjiang province a genocide. The UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab used very strong language. He called it industrial scale abuse. He's demanded that the UN be allowed access. What's your thinking on that? Should the UN have access to Xinjiang?
We would absolutely encourage authorities in China to allow the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to have appropriate access to Xinjiang. I note that the High Commissioner said in her remarks to the Human Rights Council on Friday night that she is seeking that access, and she expects an arrangement to be able to be reached with Chinese authorities. But transparency is the key here. The reports that we have seen, some very horrific reports, particularly around forced labour, around re-education camps, allegations in relation to the systematic torture and abuse of women, are deeply concerning. And Australia has made our view clear over an extended period of time now, in our own right, and on occasion with counterparts, including, as you've referred to the United Kingdom, also with the United States and with Canada, the European Union and others. These are matters which I think transparency is an important part of addressing, and one which we strongly encourage.
Is it genocide?
We have a slightly different approach to that turn of phrase, and I don't mean this in a pedantic or a semantic way, but both the UK and Canada have different mechanisms by which to make such a declaration, as indeed does the United States. But it's something which we are examining closely.
Hong Kong police detained 47 pro-democracy activists over the weekend. This is the largest mass arrest since the new national security laws last year. Is the democracy movement there doomed? Is it, in your mind, when you look at that, how can they make any ground given the heavy hand that's being used there in Hong Kong?
Kieran, we've raised our concerns and our views in relation to the imposition of the national security law and the progress to arrests and charges of these 47 individuals amplifies those concerns. We are very disappointed to see that occur, and particularly the impact that it has on the freedoms and the life in Hong Kong, underpinned by the one country, two systems approach, the basic law, and the declaration, which are in fact international undertakings, international treaties to which China is a signatory. So we will seek further information on those matters through our post in Hong Kong today. I expect the Consul General to be providing further information later this morning.
Foreign Minister, finally, the US Special Envoy on Climate, John Kerry, he said last week Australia has some differences with us. We've not been able to get on the same page completely. That was one of the problems in Madrid, as you'll recall. They were his words, unquote. Do you accept that we're not on the same page as the new US administration when it comes to climate?
Well, in fact, I think we've had very constructive engagement with the new US administration, whether it is the conversations between Secretary Kerry and Minister Angus Taylor, my discussions with Tony Blinken and the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, or indeed the Prime Minister's discussions with the President. We've been very focused on cooperation on low emissions technologies and also driving down the cost of low emissions technologies so that they are much more broadly available. We've welcomed the United States back to the Paris Agreement, an agreement which we did not leave and within which we will meet our own 2030 targets and as the Prime Minister has made very clear, be aiming for net zero emissions as close to 2050 as possible. And that is not a case of if and when, but for Australia it's a case of how. And the one thing that we have made clear for our country, so that we can be very upfront with the Australian people, is that we will not be doing that by taxation. We will be very focused on technology, and in fact that is what we are delivering, and acknowledge the work of Minister Angus Taylor in that, but also the broad, strong commitment of the Prime Minister in leading that charge.
Foreign Minister and Minister for Women, Marise Payne, very much appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Kieran.